The radiator under the courtroom window let out a long, tired hiss tone. It sounded like someone whispering a secret they were too exhausted to keep. Elena Martinez, juror number 8, tried to focus on the prosecutor's voice. But that steady she from the heater was all she could hear. Starred. Her notepad was open on her lap, the top corner of the paper chewed soft from a whole morning of nervous habit. She lined it up carefully, with a single drop of water sliding down the cold window pane. A dirt drop cut right through the reflection of the defendant, Marco Viri, making his calm face look like it was cracking. It was Tuesday, November 7th, 10:17 in the morning. The air in Department 12 of the King County Courthouse smelled like old coffee, lemon-scented polish, and the faint damp wool from people's coats. Lena smoothed her gray skirt, feeling the starched collar of her blouse scratch against her neck with every swallow. This was her civic duty, a slow, important ritual. She was supposed to listen to the facts about wire transfers and shell companies, to watch the parade of evidence. Her normal was this wooden chair, this quiet box of a room, this weight. But something felt off. A tiny crack in the day. The prosecutor, a man named Mr. Davies with a very nice suit, was pointing at a chart. The public defender, Ms. Goodwin, kept sighing as she took notes. Free. Everything was proceeding, except for Marco Viri. He wasn't looking at his lawyer or at the chart. He was leaning back in his chair, his eyes aimed at the ceiling above the jury box. He wasn't scared or angry. He looked thoughtful, light. He was studying the water stain on the white tile, tracing its shape like it was a painting in a museum. A man facing 20 years in prison for fraud shouldn't look that curious. Alina glanced down at her notepad. She'd written, Day 3, and then drawn a series of small boxes. She felt a flush of guilt, like she was back in school and not paying attention. She forced her eyes back to Mr. Davies. The people will show, he was saying, that between April and August of last year, over $2 million was funneled through these accounts, all under the control of the defendant. The words were heavy, but they bounced off her. A pen felt slippery in her fingers. To her left, juror number 7, an older man, was already starting to doze off, his chin dipping toward his chest. And then, as if he could feel her watching him, Marco Viri's gaze drifted down from the ceiling, not to his lawyer, not to the judge. His eyes, a dark slate gray, moved across the jury box and landed right on Alina. Just for a second, there was no smile, no nod, just a look of quiet, intense recognition, as if he'd been waiting for her to look up. Her breath hitched. She quickly looked down at her boxers, her heart doing a funny little kick against her ribs. When she dared to peek back, he was looking at the ceiling again, his expression once more a mask of calm study. The judge, a woman with silver glasses, announced the mid-morning recess. Sound of her gavel was a sharp welcome crack. The courtroom exhaled. Chairs scraped. People stood and stretched. Low conversations buzzed to life. Elena's own muscles felt stiff as she gathered her notepad and her cheap plastic pen. She stood. The pen tumbled from her lap, hit the floor with a click and rolled, a silly blue cylinder, away from her feet, across the smooth, worn oak. It spun in a little half circle and came to rest right against the leg of the empty defense table. For goodness sake, she muttered to herself. She hurried around the jury box rail, feeling everyone's movement around her. She crouched down to grab it, her knees popping a little. At that exact moment, Marco was being led back toward the holding cell door by a bailiff, a serious-looking man named Gary. Their path took them right past the defense table. As Marco walked, his hands cuffed in front of him, he subtly turned his foot. The polished brown leather of his shoe tapped against Elena's blue pen. It wasn't a kick, it was a gentle nudge, sliding the pen back an inch toward her reaching hand. Her fingers closed around it. She looked up. He was right there, close enough for her to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. The precise cut of his dark hair, gray just at the temples. The scent of him washed over her, not sweat or fear, but clean cotton and a faint spicy hint of sandalwood soap. It was so utterly out of place here. Eyes met hers, that same direct look. His voice was low, just for her. Under the courtroom murmur. Watch the step. Miss. Then he was gone. The bailiff's hand on his arm guided him forward. 2. The heavy door to the side corridor, the one that led to the cells, swung open and then shut behind them with a solid, echoing thud. The sound seemed to vibrate in Elena's bones. She stood up, her face feeling warm. Asterisk. Watch the step. What step? The floor was flat. It was just something people said. A polite, meaningless thing. She slipped back into the stream of jurors heading for the hallway and the promise of bad coffee. But as she walked, her hand clenched tightly around the pen, she felt it, a whisper against her palm. Not from the pen, tucked between her fingers. Against her skin was a small, stiff piece of paper she hadn't picked up. Her steps faltered. She didn't look down. She just kept walking, her fingers curling into a protective fist. In the hallway, bright under the fluorescent lights, people were chatting about the weather, about how boring the testimony was. Elena moved past them, her smile feeling tight and strange on her face, and pushed into the women's restroom. It was empty. Thank goodness. She locked herself in the farthest stall. Her heart was hammering now, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Slowly, she opened her hand. There it was, a perfectly folded square of a paper napkin. It was bright white, the kind from the courthouse cafeteria. It was crisp, like it had never been used. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The napkin was blank, completely, utterly blank. Just the embossed logo of a scale of justice in one corner. A wave of confused relief washed over her, followed by a silly embarrassment. Of course, it was nothing. He must have dropped it. She'd picked it up by accident when she grabbed her pen. Oh, imagination was running wild from the stress of jury duty. She was about to crumple it and throw it away when she held it up to the stark bathroom light. There, in the middle of the pristine white surface, was a faint, perfect circle, the ghost of a coffee cup. Inside that ring, the paper was just slightly roughened, the fibers disturbed. As if it had been damp once. A secret meeting in court, a past napkin. It was insane. He was dangerous. And in that sterile bathroom stall, with the sound of a toilet flushing in the next room, Elena Martinez felt the first real spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Not since before her quiet job at the library, before her predictable, safe life. 2. It was a spark of dizzying, terrifying curiosity. She didn't crumple the napkin. She carefully folded it again, her movements precise. She slipped it into the inner pocket of her blazer, right over her heart, where it felt like it was giving off a heat of its own. The notepad, with its little boxes, was for the official story. This blank square of paper was for something else entirely. She walked out of the stall and washed her hands, looking at her reflection in the mirror, a woman with kind brown eyes, her dark hair in a sensible bun, a responsible citizen. But the woman in the mirror had a new light in her eyes, a focused glint. The clock on the wall said recess was almost over. The next part of the trial was waiting. But Elena knew, as she walked back to the courtroom, thought that the real story had just quietly begun, not with a bang, but with the soft tap of a leather shoe on a plastic pen, the secret hiding in plain sight, on a simple white napkin. Sometimes, the biggest adventures start in the most ordinary places. All it takes is one moment of looking up from your routine, one spark of courage to notice the details others miss, and your whole world can gently, unexpectedly, turn a new page. For 3 days, the napkin lived in the inner pocket of Elena's blue blazer. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like it had its own heartbeat, a tiny pulse against her chest every time she moved. She'd wear the blazer, take it off at home, and hang it carefully in her closet, always aware of the secret it held. She'd try to focus on the witness testimony of forensic accountant named Ben talking about spreadsheets and offshore accounts. But her mind was a bird trapped in a room, flying back to that blank square of white. What did it mean? Was it a mistake? A signal? Her fingertips remembered its texture, that stiff, almost waxy feel of a cheap napkin. She'd stolen a few from the cafeteria just to compare. They were the same, but hers was different. Hers had that faint, perfect ring from a coffee cup, and inside that ring, the paper fibers felt just a little bit rougher, like a patch of sand on a smooth floor. Thursday afternoon. Back in her quiet apartment with the beige walls, she finally gave in. The trial was a slow leak of hours. Dripping away, she'd made her usual dinner, eaten it watching the news. But the world on the TV seemed distant and blurry. The napkin was all she could think about. She took the blazer from the closet. The room was silent except for the hum of her refrigerator. Her hands were steady, but a cold sweat had bloomed between her shoulder blades, making her t-shirt stick to her skin. She unfolded the napkin on her kitchen counter, under the bright LED light. Nothing. Just the ghostly circle. She remembered old spy novels, messages written in lemon juice revealed by heat. It was ridiculous. This was real life, in Seattle, not some movie. But her body was moving before her mind could talk her out of it. She filled her electric kettle and flipped it on. The click and the growing rumble of boiling water filled the silent apartment. She'd held the napkin carefully over the steam rising from the spout. Damp air fogged up the cabinets. She counted in her head, *, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, *. At 15 seconds, she saw it. A change, faint, brownish tint began to bloom along the roughened fibers inside the coffee ring. It was an ink. Looked like the paper itself was changing color, warming up and confessing. Her breath caught. She held it steadier, letting the steam do its work. Elegant, looping letters emerged from the white, as if they were rising from deep water. Speed. The handwriting was confident, almost artistic. It read, ****, the bench by the War Memorial, Volunteer Park. 8 p.m. The case is a lie. ****, the kettle clicked off. The roaring sound replaced by a sudden, ringing quiet. Lena stared at the words, T. They made the air in her kitchen feel thin. Volunteer Park. That was only a 20-minute bus ride from her apartment. The case is a lie. Those 4 words shook the foundation of everything she'd sat through for days. Her first, irreversible choice happened right then. She didn't throw the napkin away. She didn't call the judge. She carefully blotted it dry on a dish towel, folded it, and put it back in her pocket. Her heart wasn't hammering with fear anymore, was pounding with a terrible, thrilling curiosity. Friday night arrived, wrapped in a cold November drizzle. The sky was the color of a deep bruise, purple and black. At 7:45 p.m., Alina got off the bus, the wet asphalt shining under the orange streetlights. Volunteer Park was mostly empty. There smelled of wet earth, decaying leaves, and the distant damp stone of the black granite war memorial ahead. She could see the old curved iron bench, slick with rain. Facing the names of the fallen, her shoes made soft, squeaking sounds on the paved path. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made her jump. This was a mistake, a huge, dangerous mistake. She was about to turn around, to go back to her safe, quiet life. When a figure detached itself from the deep shadow beside the memorial, it was Marco Viri. He wasn't in a prison jumpsuit or handcuffs. Who wore a dark charcoal wool coat, the collar turned up against the drizzle. The city lights from below the hill caught the silver in his hair. He looked ordinary and extraordinary all at once, just a man waiting in a park. He didn't smile as she approached. She just watched her, his hands in his coat pockets. She stopped a few feet from the bench, the rain spotting her glasses. "You came," he said, whose voice was quieter than it had been in court, softer around the edges. "I read your note," Alina said. Her own voice sounded strange to her. "Said the case is a lie." He nodded slowly, then gestured to the bench. "May I?" They sat, not close, a careful foot of space between them on the cold, wet iron. He spoke, looking straight ahead at the memorial. "The man who testified on Tuesday, Ben Gable, the accountant, who wasn't just my employee, Holiday. He was my partner, B. We started the consulting firm together 7 years ago." Alina listened, the cold of the bench seeping through her wool coat. She told her a different story than the one in court. Spoke of building a business, of trust, of a slow, terrible realization that money was disappearing. Not huge sums at first, but a consistent, clever leak. He'd confronted Ben a year ago. There had been a furious argument. Threat the next day. Ben was gone, and so was the digital trail. All the financial footprints had been meticulously rerouted 2-point only at Marco. He had a 2-year head start. Marco said, his breath making a small cloud in the air. He'd built a cage of evidence around me, while I was busy building the company. The ledgers they have in court. The transfers, they're real, but they're his work, not mine. Then you have proof, Elena said, turning to look at his profile. Jew. Give it to your lawyer. A sad, almost amused smile touched his lips. Ms. Goodwin is good, but she's overworked, too. If I hand it to her now, it becomes part of the court record. Bed has powerful friends. Those friends can file motions, get protective orders, tie it up in procedure until long after your jury has decided my fate. The truths can be buried by the very system that's supposed to find it. The rain picked up, a steady, whispering patter on the leaves above them. Lena understood. Now, P. He wasn't just telling her a story. He was asking for something. What do you have? She asked, her throat tight. Everything, he said, and now he looked at her. His grey eyes were intense in the dim light. The real server logs, the hidden accounts Ben didn't know I knew about. Recording of our last argument, where he admits to the initial theft, tore on a single encrypted drive. He explained his impossible position, too. He was out on bail, but his movements and communications were monitored. Ben was watching. The prosecution was watching. He needed someone outside of it all. A conduit. Someone no one would suspect. A juror, Elena whispered. The word tasting like cold metal. A person who cares about truth, he corrected gently. I saw you, Lelina. I saw you actually listening, not sleeping, not doodling. You were trying to understand. The others, they'd already decided. You hadn't in. He knew her name. Of course he did. The lawyers had read the jury list aloud, but hearing him say it here, in the dark, rainy park, felt deeply personal. You're asking me to break the law, she said, but the protest sounded weak, even to her. I'm asking you to help the law, see? He said. His voice dropped lower, and he spoke the words that would change everything. The law isn't here, Elena. It's over there. Blind. He nodded toward the courthouse, a distant lit-up fortress down in the city. The meaning was clear. Start. The formal process in that building was failing. Sprill. Jettis was out here, on a wet bench, between two strangers. He didn't press her. He simply stood up, pulling a small, ordinary-looking USB drive in a clear plastic case from his coat pocket. He placed it on the bench between them. It looked so harmless. The password is the date we founded our company. Teeth 0-4-1-0-2-0-1-6. He repeated it slowly, making sure she heard. Then, he said, do what you think is right. No one will ever know we met. And he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the wet path. Disappearing back into the shadow of the memorial, Elena sat there, alone. B drive glinted on the dark iron. The rain cooled her burning cheeks. Her mouth was utterly dry, tasting of copper and the November night. Hugh knew her name. He'd seen her, the real her, in that box of a courtroom. And he had given her a key to a door she never knew existed. She picked up the drive. It was warm from his pocket. She closed her fist around it, the plastic edges pressing into her palm. Tore. The weight of it was far greater than its size. She walked home through the drizzle, not seeing the city lights. Her mind was a whirlwind, but one thought was crystal clear. This was no longer just about jury duty. It was about a choice. To believe in the neat story told in a warm courtroom, or to risk everything on a dangerous truth told in the cold rain. She had already chosen. The moment she held that napkin over the steam, her old quiet life had ended. A new, terrifying, and electric chapter had begun, sparked by a single, powerful idea. That sometimes, to find what's right, you have to be willing to step outside the lines and listen to a story no one else can hear. 6 weeks is a long time to live with a secret. By mid-December, the rhythm of it had woven itself into Elena's life. The trial was a grinding machine in the daylight hours, a dry recitation of numbers and emails, but in the cracks, between during lunch breaks, on evenings, on quiet Sunday afternoons are different. Hidden Life pulsed. She became an expert in quiet places. The Seattle Central Library's fifth-floor Red Hall, with its strange, angular walls that smelled of old paper and new carpet, was their first spot. She'd be browsing travel guides, and he'd appear to shelves over, examining a book on architecture. Without looking at her, his voice a low murmur under the library's hum, he'd say, "The file named Invoice Batch is the key." Cross-reference it with the bank ledger from October. She'd nod slightly, her heart doing a nervous tap dance against her ribs. She'd feel the warmth of the small USB drive in her coat pocket. A constant, heavy presence. Another time, it was the Burke Museum on the UW campus, under the enormous hanging skeleton of a blue whale. The bone-white ribs arched high above them, making everyone feel small. Thea was cool and still. Marco stood beside her, both of them looking up, as if in awe. A group of schoolchildren chattered past. In that moment of noise, his hand brushed against hers. It wasn't romantic. It was a transfer. A second, smaller drive slipped from his fingers into her palm. Her skin tingled where he'd touched it. "Spore audio file," he whispered. "Lesson with headphones." Then he was gone, melting into the crowd near the dinosaur fossils. The romance, if that's what it was, wasn't about flowers or whispered sweet nothings. Lemieux. It was built on shared glances that held volumes, on the electric jolt of successfully passing information unseen. 2. It was the language of lowered voices and meeting places that looked like accidents. 'Twas in the way her stomach would flutter when she saw a man in a dark coat from a distance, and the strange mixture of relief and disappointment when it wasn't him. 2. It was in the new lines of tension she saw around his eyes in the courtroom, and the unspoken question in his gaze. Have you listened? Do you believe me now? She did believe him. The files on the drives were a damning detailed map of Ben Gable's deception. She saw the real spreadsheets, the backdated authorizations, the secret email server. She listened to the audio recording on her headphones in her dark bedroom Marcos.com. Furious voice, and Ben's higher, pleading one, admitting to the first loan he never paid back. The evidence was real. It was also overwhelming, a maze of digital footprints. The danger became a constant companion, a sixth sense. She noticed a man with bright yellow shoes, who seemed to be on her bus 2 days in a row. Was he following her? Her breath would catch in her throat. She started taking different routes home, her palms slick on the bus's metal pole. She saw Ben Gable, the witness, the supposed victim, leaving the courthouse one afternoon. Scootoos. He was laughing with one of the prosecutors, a sleek, easy smile on his face. That smile made Elena's blood run cold, too. It was the smile of a man who thought he'd already won. The impossible choice took shape slowly, like frost creeping across a window pane. She had the power to expose the truth. But how? If she went to the judge herself, she'd be in contempt of court, removed from the jury, possibly even arrested. Her life would be turned inside out. She gave everything to Marco's lawyer, Miss Goodwin. As he'd warned, the legal machinery might slow it down, bog it in procedures until she and the others were forced to deliver a verdict based on the lie. The darkest point came on a Tuesday, December 19th. The trial was winding down. Final arguments were just a week away. Marco's lawyer was fighting hard, but the prosecution's case was neat, simple, and powerful. That afternoon, they met in a downtown parking garage, the one under the old brick building on 3rd Avenue. It was a terrible, practical place. The air was thick with the smell of cold concrete, gasoline, and echoes. Footsteps bounced off the low ceiling. They stood beside her car, a sensible silver hatchback. His face looked strained in the fluorescent light. "It has to be now, Alina, before they rest their case. Once they finish, it's over." "What do you want me to do?" Shay asked, her voice a hollow echo in the empty space. "Give the drive to the judge, anonymously. Mail it. Drop it at the clerk's desk. They'll have to call a mistrial. It will force a new investigation. One that looks at Ben. She stared at the oily stain on the floor near her tire. And if they trace it to me, I'll go to jail for jury tampering. My life. It's not much, but it's mine. He was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was a drip of water from a pipe somewhere. Swir. When he spoke, his words were soft, but they hit her like stones. Juror, already in the cage with me. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and in that harsh garage light, she saw it. V-mirror. Shu wasn't just a good citizen helping from the outside. She was deep inside it now, her hands dirty with secrets, her loyalties split, her every move a potential crime. The law she'd always respected was a wall she was on the wrong side of. Who was in a physical cage. Accused. She was in a cage of her own making. Complicit. The fear on his face wasn't just for himself anymore. Worse for her, too. They were in this together, bound by this dangerous truth. She drove home that night feeling numb. The Christmas lights strung up on houses seemed garish and fake. Little dots of cheer in a world that had turned grey and complicated. She couldn't eat. She sat at her kitchen table, the one with the little scratch from where she'd dropped a pan last year, and stared at the 2 USB drives on the clean wood surface. The next day in court, Shu watched the prosecutor, Mr. Davies, begin his closing argument. Who was a decent man. She knew that. He had a photo of his young daughter on his desk. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. He believed in his case. T spoke with passion about the rule of law, about protecting the hard-earned money of regular people from greedy, clever men like Marco Viri. Elena listened, and she felt a deep, sickening crack inside her. Shu was the flaw in his perfect machine. She was the lie in his truth. Her secret knowledge made a mockery of his sincere passion. She looked at Marco, sitting still at the defense table. He looked back, and for a fleeting second, she saw not a partner in secret, but a man who had handed her an unbearable weight. A man who had given her a key, but hadn't shown her the door it opened. The choice was clear, and it was terrible. Option 1. Use the key to free him, and risk destroying her own life in the process. Option 2. Throw the key away, let the legal process run its course. Live, with the knowledge that she had let an innocent man go to prison to save herself. And then, as Mr. Davies pointed a finger at Marco and said, "This man built a maze of lies." Elena realized the promise of truth was a lie. Marco's truth, the one on the drives, only went far enough to prove he wasn't guilty. Pointed the finger squarely at Ben Gable. But what about the rest? Ben moving money to shell companies, but a few of those companies had familiar names she'd seen in newspapers linked to local politicians, to city development deals. Marco's evidence was a spotlight, but it was a narrow beam, designed to illuminate only one man in the darkness. It freed him, but left the wider, deeper corruption untouched, still thriving in the shadows. He wasn't offering her the whole truth. He was offering her a trade, his freedom. For her silence on everything else, the realization was like a bucket of ice water. It didn't just cool her feelings, froze them solid. She'd been so swept up in the danger and the connection, in being the heroine of a secret story, that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. Now, she did. In that moment of cold clarity, sitting in the jury box with her hands folded in her lap, she understood that the most important choices aren't between right and wrong. They're between one incomplete right and another. And the only way forward is to find the courage to build a bigger truth, one that helps more than just one person, even if the path to it is the most frightening of all. The clarity was cold, like a clean, sharp knife. It cut through the fog of fear and dizzying attraction that had clouded Elena's mind for weeks. Marco's evidence was a key, but it only unlocked his cage. It left the rest of the corrupt men, Ben Gable and his powerful friends, free to keep building their own sheet, being ready to risk everything for a single truth. Now, she saw she had to risk it for a bigger one. Her transformation didn't start with a bang. Started in the deep silence of her apartment at 2 a.m., the night before the trial's final day. The only light came from her laptop screen, casting a blue glow on her determined face. The 2 USB drives were plugged in side by side. For the first time, She wasn't just reviewing the files for Marco's innocence. She was studying them like a map, looking for the roads that led outward. She found them, a shell company called Evergreen Holdings that appeared not just in Ben's records, but in a news article about a suspicious city land deal, a consultant's fee paid to a strategic urban partners, which shared an address with a lobbying firm mentioned in a political scandal last year. The connections were threads, faint but real, leading out of Marco's case and into a wider, darker network. Her flaw, that deep need to find the real story. 2. Believe in hidden truths was no longer a weakness, it was her weapon. Shakun, just hand this to Marco's lawyer and hope for the best. The system was too slow, too clogged. She couldn't give it to the judge anonymously. That would only trigger Marco's mistrial and likely bury the wider connections forever. There was only one person who could act as both a shield and a sword. Someone already inside the machine but not yet beaten down by it. Peter Arden, Marco's public defender, who's young, tired, with perpetually ink-stained fingers and a rumpled suit. But she had seen a flicker of real fire in his eyes during cross-examination. He wanted to win. More than that, she believed he wanted justice. At 8:30 a.m., an hour before court was to begin for the final arguments, Elena walked into the King County Courthouse. 2. She didn't go to the jury room. She went straight to the public defender's office on the 4th floor. Hallway. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. Her heart was a steady, strong drum in her chest, not a frantic flutter. This was her choice. This was her fire. She asked for Mr. Arden at the reception desk. Winner when he came out, blinking in surprise. She didn't mince words. I need 5 minutes. In your office. It's about your client, Marco Veri, and it will change everything. He must have seen something in her face, a seriousness that brooked no argument. He led her to a small, cluttered room overflowing with file boxes, a desk with a landscape of paper mountains. Sheet and sit. I am juror number 8, she began, her voice level. What I am about to tell you will get me removed from the jury and possibly charged. But before that happens, you need to listen. She laid it all out. The napkin, the meetings, the USB drives. She didn't mention the park bench or the museum. She simply said the evidence had come into her possession anonymously. Shu watched his expression shift from confusion to shock to intense, focused concentration. She handed him a single, new USB drive she had prepared that morning. On it was a curated file, the most damning evidence of Ben Gable's fraud against Marco, plus a separate folder titled Connections, with the links to the shell companies and the news articles. This proves your client is innocent, she said. If you subpoena these records, if you, as his attorney, discover them through your own investigation, you can force them into the open now, today. You can save your client and you can shine a light on the whole rotten system. Let this happen. Peter Arden stared at the drive, speared in his hand, as if it were a live grenade. These highly irregular. These. You understand what you've done. I understand that the truth is sometimes delivered through a side door, Elena said. Use it. Now. Before the prosecution rests its case. She turned and left his office. 2. She didn't go to the jury room. She walked to the courtroom itself, took her usual seat in the jury box, and waited. The clock above the judge's bench read 9:03 a.m. Final arguments were supposed to start at 9:30 sharp. The room filled slowly. Prosecutors came in, looking confident. Marco was led to his seat, his eyes finding hers immediately. His look was a question. She gave in a small, calm nod. He frowned, confused. At 9:28, the judge entered. Counsel, are you ready to proceed with closing arguments? Mr. Davies stood. The people are ready, Your Honor. Peter Arden stood, who looked different. The tired slouch was gone. Stood straight, his voice clear and strong as it cut through the stuffy air. Your Honor, before we proceed, the defense has an urgent motion to present. New, critical exculpatory evidence has just come to light through our investigation. Evidence that not only exonerates Mr. Veri, but reveals a deliberate frame-up by the state's own witness, Ben Gable, and points to possible corruption extending beyond this courtroom. The room which had been murmuring softly, fell into a dead, shocked silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. The judge adjusted her silver glasses, peering down. Mr. Arden, this is highly unusual at this juncture. The evidence is digital, Your Honor, and we have reason to believe there are parties who will move to suppress it the moment they are aware. We request an immediate hearing. We have the files ready. At the prosecution's table, Mr. Davies's face had gone from confident to pale. He leaned over and whispered furiously to his assistant. But all of this was background noise to Alina. She was watching Marco. He had turned fully in his chair, no longer looking at his lawyer, but staring directly at her in the jury box. His expression moved through stages. First, confusion at his lawyer's words, then dawning comprehension as he listened to our investigation, and then, finally, a slow, chilling understanding. His eyes locked with Elena's. The gratitude she expected wasn't there. Instead, she saw a dawning, icy realization. She hadn't followed his plan. She had changed the game. The judge was speaking, agreeing to a brief recess to review the defense's motion. The gallery erupted in a buzz of confused conversation. The bailiff called for order. Marco kept his eyes on Alina. He mouthed a single, silent word. Why? She didn't look away. She held his gaze, her own face calm, resolved. She had stepped into the fire, not just to pull him out, but to burn down the forest that had trapped him. It was bigger than both of them now. Peter Arden glanced back at her, just once, and gave the smallest nod of respect. Had his sword. He was raising it. The gavel banged. We are in recess until 11 a.m., the judge announced. Counsel, in my chambers. Now, as everyone stood, a whirlwind of movement and chatter. Alina finally broke her gaze from Marco. She looked at the clock. 9:47 a.m. The trial was supposed to have been wrapping up by noon. It had just blown wide open. She took a deep, shaking breath. First spark of her fire had been lit. Now, they would all have to watch it burn. And sometimes, that's how real change begins. Not with a whisper in the dark, but with a clear, brave voice speaking up in the light. Trusting that one act of courage, no matter how scary, can alter the course of many lives for the better.